Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2018 Fiona Wain Oration. To open proceedings this afternoon, would you please welcome to the stage ACT Commissioner for Sustainability and the Environment and a Director of Sustainable Business Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Kate Auty.
Thank you. This is the 5th Fiona Wain Oration. Many of you will know her work and be aware of her legacy. And this oration celebrates her many achievements. Some of you won't be quite as aware of Fiona's contribution to sustainable business endeavours in our country. She was, of course, here in the role of SBA CEO for 10 years. And during that time, as the second such CEO, she guided, inspired and challenged many of us. She was a stimulus for change in respect of business, government, academia and also social enterprises. In 2012, she passed out of our lives and left us with her enthusiasm for frank and fearless advocacy, for innovation and collaboration. More will be said about Fiona as we go through the afternoon's presentations. I've been asked on behalf of the board here today to thank and acknowledge the generous sponsorship that we have from Purvis Environmental Fund and also from the Zinc Charitable Trust. But it's my deep honour to now bring to the podium another legend. I've just told you about Fiona Wain, legend, and now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Auntie Norma Ingram, legend. Legend in her people's eyes and legend for many of us who are non-Indigenous. She's a Wiradjuri elder. She was born in Cowra. She was raised at the Urambi Aboriginal Reserve, and she's had a chairing role in a vast array of highly significant Aboriginal organisations across the spectrum of Aboriginal achievement and endeavour. And it ranges, her contribution ranges from chairing the Wyanga Elders Program to something as seemingly different as being involved with the Murrawina preschool program for Aboriginal children. She's been involved in both state and local land councils at a very high level. She's now, in 2019, the Labor candidate for Newtown. And that's a place she knows well because when she came away from Cowra, she came to Redfern and she was there seeking education for her children. She has 3 children and 2 grandchildren, and all of them have benefited from her commitment to education, aspiration, endeavour and enthusiasm. Auntie Norma is an educator and a teacher, and they're not the same thing. She was the first Aboriginal woman to gain a master's degree from Harvard, and she continues to teach and train and educate for organisations as diverse as Qantas, the TAFE and UTS. Here today, she joins us, having received last year an award for lifetime achievement in the New South Wales Women of the Year Awards. And that brings me to introducing her and saying that when we do in fact have her come to the stage today, she is exemplary of the Reconciliation Australia enthusiasm this year for acknowledging Aboriginal women, and the hashtag was "Because of her, we can." Because of her, we can.
Thanks, everyone. Bodre Gumurawa, everyone. That's greetings in our local, Aboriginal language, that of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. The acknowledgement and welcome to country is a long protocol of Aboriginal people since time immemorial. And it's about opening up our arms and our heart and saying, welcome to this ancient land. Across this land, from north to south, east to west, we have over 200 different Aboriginal language groups or nations. We don't call ourselves tribes. And within that, where we are now is the Eora Nation. So from the Hawkesbury River to the north, the Nepean River just this side of the Blue Mountains, and the Georges River, we have the Eora Nation, and there are 29 small clan groups or family groups. And where we are now is the Gadigal peoples, the Gadigal Clan, who were there out to when the tall ships came in from England. And I always like to say Budri Gumarawa. It's not my language is Wiradjuri, it's my mother's country, but I've lived in this area most of my life, and I also represent the Aboriginal Elders Program in Redfern. But in my language, we say Yamadumarang, Norma Ingram Galley Wiradjuri, and to shorten all that to say hello, we say Yama. So I'd like you to look at somebody next to you and shake their hand, kiss them on the cheek if they'll let you, and say Yama to greet. So that's excellent, and Yama is not just hello. Yama is really acknowledging people and saying, I see you, you are important. Because there are many people in our communities that people just pass them by. And we only need to go out to some of our Sydney streets and see people who are living rough on the streets, and people just pass them by and they don't even stop to say hello. So when you get the chance to say Yama to people, and I'd love the whole of Sydney to be saying that, this is what it's all about. When we're doing Welcome to Country, it's about, as I said, opening up our hearts. We are all Australians here. We have Aboriginal people who've been here since the Dreamtime, over 60,000 years. And we have Australians who have recently arrived. But we are still all important. But it's about acknowledging our First Peoples. It's about acknowledging our Aboriginal people and our Torres Strait Islander people to the north, who are all Indigenous to this country. And if you're talking about sustainability and the environment, we have been looking after this country since the Dreamtime. And that's really so important to us to acknowledge. And if you look at the Gadigal, for example, we had a freshwater stream called the Tank Stream that came from Centennial Park. I was going to say botanical. Centennial Park that came in right down to the harbour. Unfortunately, that was polluted in the first 20 years of colonisation by the English. And so the Gadigal, we look after the land, the waterways. The Gadigal are sunrise people. Our dreaming for this area is the whale, the Gurrawal, and salt water. So when you talk about Aboriginal people, it's either salt water or fresh water. But water is so important to us, and it's very sad to see what's happening in our state of New South Wales inland. But without water, we die. It's as plain and simple as that. So it's up to all of us. We are, as Aboriginal people, 3% of the total population of Australians. 97% of every other Australian. So let's join together, as we said, in recognising reconciliation, all of those. We need to work together. We cannot do it alone. But this is our country, and if we don't look after it, Mother Nature will repent and say no, and she will look and she will just slap us all and say, you have to look after me so that I can look after you. I want to acknowledge Aboriginal elders, elders of the Gadigal, Aboriginal elders right across this country, and also elders from other cultures and other countries. Very important. We need our elders, and I, as an Aboriginal elder, have a responsibility to pass on my culture and the information to others. As one of our elders says, in order for me to keep my culture, I have to give it away. I have to give it away to you. I have to give it away to everybody that I meet and I come in contact with, because I'll never stop talking about who I am as an Aboriginal person and my culture, because that's all there to share. This the most ancient land, and I can say I belong to the most ancient and continuous practice culture on the planet. I'm very proud that I can say that. So let's all work together, acknowledging the next generation and the responsibility also that we have to nurture our next generation. Who will be our future leaders, wherever that may be, business, government, whatever. We need to make sure that our younger ones are okay and being looked after. So just want to wish you all well, good health, and certainly that I know that my ancestors, my spiritual ancestors are always with me, so I always feel safe about that. And may our spiritual ancestors walk with you as you walk on this ancient land. So as we always say, enjoy your conference today. Well, the oration today. And as we always say, it always was, always is, always will be Aboriginal land under the tar and cement or wherever you go across this country. So welcome everybody and enjoy the day. But I've got one thing to do. I'm going to invite Peter just to come up. I've got a little token badge that I hope he can wear and take back. It's the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag. So the Aboriginal flag is black, red and yellow, the black for our people, the red for our land, and the yellow is the sun. And the Torres Strait Islander flag is all about, there are many islands up there, so the blue and the green is all about the islands. I'd like to give this to you.
Great, I'll give mine to you.
Thank you, thank you,
So
thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Auntie Norma. Would you please now welcome to the stage the founder and CEO of Sustainovate, also a director and the chair of Sustainable Business Australia, ladies and gentlemen, Jacqui Fegant-McGeachie.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. And thank you, Auntie Norma, for those very, very wise words, and particularly the thought about Mother Nature. I love the you look after me so I can look after you. So I'm Jacqui Fegant-McGeachie, and it's my great privilege to introduce our international guest speaker to deliver the 5th Fiona Wain Oration. But before I do, I'd like to reflect on Sustainable Business Australia, or as we all fondly call it, SBA. Since 1991, SBA has been championing the role of businesses to be more sustainable, because businesses who take responsibility and action on addressing climate change and other environmental, social and governance issues have proven to be more successful and resilient, and will be so into the future. Over the past 27 years, SBA has represented and continues to represent a broad church of organisations across the business, NGO, academic and government landscape. And you can see some of the members there up on your screen. Our members share in a common vision to galvanise outcomes around Australia's sustainable development agenda. We're supporting companies to better measure, value and report on energy and climate, human rights, natural capital, mobility, or advocating for the transformation of Australia's economy for it to be, one day soon I hope, zero carbon and circular. SBA creates value, impact and voice on behalf of its members. The mission of SBA accelerated when, in 2014, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the WBCSD, invited SBA to become their Australian network partner, replacing the Business Council of Australia after 17 years. And we have Peter Bakker's foresight and leadership as President and CEO of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development to thank for that. But before I formally introduce Peter, I did want to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank our Executive Director and CEO, Andrew Peterson, who over the last 7 years has shown tremendous leadership and vision and has grown SBA into the organisation it is today. So thank you very much, Andrew. Since 2012, when Peter became only the 3rd CEO of the WBCSD, he has not only grown its membership base, as well as that of the global network, by the Business Council's value, impact and voice throughout the hallways of the United Nations, to parliaments across the European Union, and at key business leadership forums across the globe, be it in Brazil, China, Japan, recently in Singapore, and yes, even in the United States, and finally here in Australia. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. In addition to running the WBCSD, Peter has been a commissioner on the Global Commission on Business and Sustainable Development. He is currently a co-chair on redefining the role of business for sustainable development. He is chairman of the International Integrated Reporting Council. He is an ambassador against hunger in the United Nations World Food Programme and also sits on the corporate sustainability advisory boards for the likes of IKEA, BASF, Nespresso, Procter & Gamble and global car company Daimler. Just a few things there. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Peter Bakker, President of the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, to deliver the fifth oration.
So I should say Yama, but I kind of practice good day. Anyway, Yama. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me, for having an international guest speaker this afternoon in this beautiful room, beautiful art gallery. Andrew, thanks for making all this happen. I know what an incredible effort it is. And thank all of you for joining us. It's been 10 years ago, I think, since I last was in Australia. Somewhere in my dark past, I was involved in the company TNT when it was acquired by the Dutch Post. I am Dutch by origin. So I've been here a lot. And I just got interviewed by ABC television. And it was remarkable, the questions that I got. You know, what do you think about the fact that the government in Australia doesn't have a climate policy, and how can business act if that's not around? And wow, that sounded mighty complex. It also sounded mighty 10 years ago, because in every other country in the world, that conversation has long died down. Their governments, citizens, businesses are pulling together to fight climate change, to take climate action, to look at the opportunities that that brings. Of course, I would argue complex political environments are not unique to Australia. We have a few other countries which had rather surprising outcomes of elections. But if you dive into those, you will see something that is quite fundamental. You will see more and more people who feel left behind by the system, by the elite, by the political elite or business elite, and that's eroding trust in society. And at the core, that's what sustainability is about. This is not just about greenhouse gas emissions or climate change. This is about a fundamental reconstruct of societies. If you want to focus on climate, then the crisis is now pretty serious. And again, the questions I got, all I saw while traveling the world over the last few months, it was summer in the Northern Hemisphere, was images of Australian farmers walking on their land struck by droughts, having to kill their own animals because it wasn't humane to let them live any longer. How can you even talk about climate change if that's happening? How can you even say there is not a climate policy when today the Prime Minister announces a $5 billion drought resilient fund? That's pretty late climate policy, but it's climate policy for you. And what I said, trust in society is now so much eroded. The fake news has become a new word. But also in sports, I think you had some more incidents here yourself. In business, in tech, in what is the future that we can offer people. And yet there is also hope from strange and unsuspected places. The SDGs have been agreed. The Sustainable Development Goals were agreed in 2015, 17 goals, 169 targets describing the future we want. This was, of course, done in the United Nations, and this is basically the answer to anyone who wants to know what is sustainability about. We had the Millennium Development Goals, who talked about eradicating poverty. The Sustainable Development Goals talk about a future, an integrated approach to a future where both planet, people are all in a balanced manner. And then there is the Paris Agreement. I think last time I checked, Australia is still part of that. Even though I think you've politically said you won't have time this year to do much about it, and you might not even come to the COP. Well, I'll just give you a warning shot. That's going to kill the competitiveness of this country. Because the move to a low-carbon society is now inevitable. It cannot be stopped. It will not be stopped. The world will move there. And you know, I said on television that we should be realistic. Business people are not dreamers. I'm not a hippie. This is a country that is, for its economy and for many of its businesses, dependent on coal. And decarbonization means we're going to have to move away from coal. But if your economy is dependent on that, that's a lot trickier than if you have no coal or just a little. So the transition pathways in Australia will look different than they might look in other countries. But transition you must. And so therefore business must take the lead in what is the end point on the horizon where we want to go. And then we can have debates, can we do that in 10 years, in 5 years, in 20 years? And create pathways to get to that end goal. But do not stick your head in the sand. What I'm basically trying to tell you is that in the next 10, 15 years, the world will go through massive system transformations. And that's very uncomfortable news for those of you in business, because I've been in business, like I said. And in business, we are great at managing incremental improvements. A little bit of productivity, a little bit of pricing power, a little bit of whatever, and the margins will go up, the value will go up. We get our bonus, we go home, and we try it again. But this is system transformation, radical system transformation. And it's not going to be because I'm now in the sustainability space that I believe sustainability will be the only reason. The main driver for system transformation is going to be technology. If we're smart, and I'm talking globally humanity, sustainability will be the shaper of the transformation. It's no longer just about the environment. It has to be about people, society, social capital, as much as just the climate, the water, the whatever else we look at. It's tough, you know. There are now new concepts called science-based targets. And if you look at TCFD, I know some of the companies in Australia have taken that really seriously. If you look at the science-based targets for climate change versus where you make your cash flow today, you will face dilemmas. There are companies making brilliant cash flow, which are totally opposed to science-based targets. What are you going to do? Again, same thing, find transition pathways. And the biggest challenge probably for business is, how do we deal with the tension between competition and collaboration? Because all of us, and Aussie entrepreneurs are amongst the toughest in the world. All of us are grown in models of we will outcompete competition. We're better, smarter, faster than anybody else. But none of the businesses I work with, and we work with some of the largest, are big enough, impactful enough to deal with these challenges alone. Only when we work together in platforms like yours will this work. So let me give a few quick examples of these radical system transformations. Let's start climate. That seems to be the hot topic in town. So the IPCC has published its report 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. The IPCC 1.5 degrees report. There's 2 messages screaming in your faces. One is 1.5 degrees warming will be reached sooner than expected. It could be there at 2040. The second is, and that's a little more concerning, we thought we would have a safe operating space up until 2 degrees. That hope is taken away. You may not even want to talk about climate in the countries, particularly in your politics. The rest of the world is now shifting, saying, how can we stop at 1.5 degrees warming? We in WBCSD over the last 3-4 days had 500-something business executives from around the world. I got to make a speech to them. I said 1.5 degrees is now the top. That's where we're going to go. 3 years ago, people would have thrown things at me or asked me to be fired and taken home. Everybody accepted this is now the challenge we need to go to. Nobody agreed it would be easy, but we accept the challenge. Look at mobility, the way you move around towns like Sydney. Electric vehicles are here, not in your town, by the looks on the streets so much. In many of the other cities of the world, you will find lots of electric vehicles. 10 years from now, electric vehicles will be the norm. Norway has said no more combustion engines will be sold after 2025. The Dutch state, for instance, has been taken to court by an NGO. The duty of care of the state is to make sure that we stay below 1.5 degrees. They won the first case, state appealed, the appeal was overthrown. Dutch state is now held responsible, legally held responsible to deliver a strategy of decarbonization. Those are the things that will change. But cars will change much more. Autonomous vehicles, you may have heard of it, self-driving cars. And that combination, electric vehicles, self-driving cars, will lead to something new, which is mobility as a service. None of us, unless we're petrol heads, will continue to buy our own vehicles. If we need a vehicle, we'll Uber it, or whatever the service will be in the future. That will mean a massive erosion of jobs. Like I said, I was in TNT, 50, 60,000 truck drivers around the world. 10 years from now, they will all be jobless. Skill set and age will not make it easy for them to find new jobs. Those job transition pathways need to be created now, unless we want more Brexits and other pleasant results. In January 16 next year, the science-based targets for the food system will be published. Because we, the people who want change, are getting a little smarter. We have analyzed why does climate action work? Maybe not here, but everywhere else. What is it that we did well? And the answer is we made science indisputable. You can no longer argue with the IPCC. It is robust work. But if you look at the food system, which is as broken as any other system on the planet, what are we going to do to create science? Is sugar good? Is it bad? Is meat? Is whatever the conversations are? January 16 next year, the book will come out. It will radically change the conversation in the food system. Companies will be held accountable whether they deliver products that are in accord with the science. The biggest thing that will probably change in the next few years is the definition of success in business. And there's many words you can use for it. You know, I think we make a mistake of talking about integrated reporting or ESG. Yeah, those are all instruments and tools that we need to think about. But at the core of it all will be the conversation about the cost of capital. So I said it before, I'm not a hippie. I wear the uniform. So I'm of course concerned about polar bears or turtles in fishing nets. But it is going to only work if we change the definition on the cost of capital. And there's now plenty of examples. I mentioned TCFD. It's not so much the disclosure of emissions, it's the disclosure of processes that boards use to manage these risks and these emissions. It's the strategies that companies build to stay within a 2 degrees or 1.5 degree world. That's where business decision-making will change. There are now examples. Danone has a $2 billion financing facility in a syndication with 12 banks. And the interest rate in that $2 billion loan will be determined by the fact whether Danone delivers against ESG targets 3 years out. If they meet ESG, environmental and social targets 3 years out, they will get a retrospective discount on interest. The cost of capital will be lower if they are more environmentally and socially performing. I was in India a few weeks ago. CEO of a coal-fired power company was complaining. The pension funds in California and Nordics have decided not to want to invest in that type of business anymore. And through syndication, they used to, in the past, be an important source of financing for these type of long-term assets. The cost of capital for loans of coal-fired power plants in India has now shot up to such a level that investing in that stuff makes no more sense. He is thinking about disinvesting the stuff he has, and he has shifted to solar and wind for all the future. I don't know if India is a customer of yours in Australia, but the financial market will stop the demand for you. So it's not just me shouting at you, please get serious and move out. It will be the financial market taking the assets down that will use the stuff that you were hoping to sell, making you completely uncompetitive as a country unless you get back on the forefoot. And you can. I know you can. 10, 15 years ago, when I was involved in the acquisition of TNT, I met some of the boldest, brightest entrepreneurs in the world. In those days, the conversations that I had when I would meet other CEOs in this town would all be about, oh yeah, Australia is actually the center of Asia. We will dominate China and all that space. Hasn't quite worked out, I guess, but the confidence will soon come back. The business case for sustainability is now so clear. No company here in the room can attract the talents it needs if it doesn't have a serious plan. One of the most famous oil and gas companies in the world, certainly one of the richest, Statoil in Norway, has changed its name to Equinor. Why? Because they can't get talents to work for a company that has the word oil in the name. It's the primary reason. Ask the CEO. The cost of inaction is shooting up everywhere. Unilever has more than $300 million of annual cost of disruptions in its supply chain as a result of changing weather patterns and intensity in droughts or floods. The cost is shooting up. The droughts here in your own country. The opportunities are everywhere. $12 trillion of economic opportunities by moving to the SDGs, according to the Better Business, Better World report. And governance will catch up with you. Fiduciary duty of companies will change. So that brings me to the conclusion of this oration. And actually all I'm asking you to do is to show leadership. And the problem with asking an international speaker is that he or she, in this case he, completely damages your beautiful language, because I'm not native. And I speak about lots of things in a language that I think sounds like English without not always knowing what the words mean. So I talk about leadership all the time, you know, it sounds so good. Leadership, we need you. Somebody said yesterday to me, there was a poster in the First World War with this finger. Your country needs you. Well, it's actually become your planet needs you. But leadership, if you go back to the origins of the word, to the basic origins of the English language, means path finder. And that's precisely what I want you to remember. Because I'm not here to tell you sustainability is a business case and this is where we're going to go. I don't quite know where we go. Roughly, we can give you the sketch. I certainly don't know how to get there, but you're going to have to find the path. And that's really what I ask of you. Be pathfinders. And it's fantastic to be here, to be the guest of SBA, as it once was called, but not anymore. Today, it becomes, ta-da, the BCSD Australia. Thank you.
Please now welcome Dr. John Hewson to the stage for a conversation with Peter Bakker. Dr. Hewson recently joined the board of the newly named BCSD Australia and is also the new chair-elect.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for being here. I'm not sure that I should sit on the right side of Peter or the left side, but I don't think it probably matters too much.
For the viewer, it's different.
A very clear message, Peter, in what you've given to the broader Australian community. It is a collaborative responsibility, as you said, although I'm one of those people who gets quite frustrated by the fact that the business community in this country doesn't provide the leadership, the pathfinding role that we think they can. It's starting to come. Our politicians are so far behind, I think, the sentiment of the electorate. And I'm not going to make a political comment, but I did enjoy the result in Wentworth. Because it was recognition of the significance of the issue of climate. And the argument I put at the time is, I think a government forfeits its right to govern if it doesn't have a genuine climate action plan. So we don't want to spend too much time talking to each other. We wanted to give you the opportunity to ask as many questions as you like. We've got the opportunity of having Peter here, and Peter's very keen to sort of extend and expand on some of the things he's said. So can we take some questions? Yes, we'll start here.
Peter, I just have a question. Given the fact that the science is so clear, the clarion bell is ringing, what is it that business does not understand in Australia, or government to that point, to take action so that we're not left behind, so that they can innovate and start to see the opportunity for what it is?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So given the clarity of science, the indisputability of it, what is it that is holding back business and or government here in Australia to act? Is that good? So, well, it's impossible for me to comment on the Australian psyche, and nor should I comment on political developments in the country, because I just don't understand enough of it. But anytime, no, that's, I do begin to realize we're in the room of the converted, so we're all pretty much in agreement. But anytime any country, Australia is no different, is busy with its own politics and changes prime minister 5 times in a couple of years, you're going to be inward looking. And when you're on an island on the other side of the planet, far, far away from many of the other economics, you are at risk of not seeing that your little boat is floating in a direction where nobody else is going. And that's not an analysis of the psyche or the reasons why you don't move. I saw some encouraging signs, climate. One of the associations of directors was last week, I believe, came out with a survey saying the #1 risk facing business is climate. Sure. One of the big mining companies coming out, we need a price on carbon. So there are some voices. What I can only tell you is that the strange thing about Australia at the moment is business seems to be looking at politics and use it as an excuse not to move. And that's something that I see nowhere else anymore. I saw that 5 years ago everywhere, and then you had these debates, China wouldn't move until America, and America thought there was no point in moving because China, also that has all died away. And that's because it's not even the science that is so clear. It is clear. I mean, but not too many people will read up on the science. It's just the weather is changing. 2 storms in the US, $30 billion. 11 typhoons, Southeast Asia, $10 billion. 100 people dead in Portugal. I don't know how many. In Sweden, I don't know if anyone ever been to the north of Sweden. It's mainly wet and gray. There were so many forest fires in the north of Sweden that all the firefighters in Sweden combined could only cover 25% of the surface to deal with it. California, Australia and the droughts, floodings in India. The intensity is going up anywhere. I guess people look at the news here. How can droughts not be climate related to the extent and the consistency that they're building up here? So I don't think there is a reason not to act. I don't think there's a reason for the US to step out of the Paris Agreement other than fixed economic interests. Some people are better served staying in the model as is. And they will argue long and hard for it, and that's probably their right, because that's what incentivizes them. But I think, that's where BCSD Australia steps in, by promoting things like TCFD that will radically change the governance and the transparency. There's now yesterday or 2 days ago in Singapore, we helped COSO, which is the International Enterprise Risk Management, to, for the first time ever, these are the as nerdy accountants as you can possibly ever find, have issued the guidance to integrate ESG, environment and social indicators, into enterprise risk management systems. That will force every board to answer not just balance sheet ratio questions, but environmental and social questions. Some countries, China next year in nationwide, will step up the carbon price, and we'll see whether that accelerates. I think, leading companies must lead. And all of you must realize that if you do not lead, and if politics in Aussie cannot be improved, the country will just go down and down in the rankings and lose competitive position. And you don't want that to happen because you're bright people, you're smart people. I mean, I used to run a company that was built by Sir Peter Ablis. He started, well, actually it was somebody else starting it, running toilets from one end, toilet pots from one end to the other end in Sydney. By the time we bought it, it had operations in 70 countries. It was at crazy economics, I have to add, flying aeroplanes around all of the world. It was Australian entrepreneurship that built it. Turn the focus on this agenda, you'll rule again. Keep turning it on the past, we'll just forget about the island.
So, question just here in the middle.
What are your Dutch mathematicians saying about rising sea levels these days? We think it is a problem in Australia nowadays.
No, it's a very interesting point and a crazy point to illustrate. I don't know whether the mathematicians in the Netherlands have anything to say on it, but there's a more important commission on this topic, which is the Commission for Delta Works. So as you know, half the country of the Netherlands is between 3 and 5 meters below sea level. So if sea level were to rise, this country would half disappear and probably more. And Amsterdam, Rotterdam, all these big towns are underwater and gone. So it's a major threat conceptually. 2 months ago, the Commission for Delta Works, which is there to protect the country against sea, came out with a report saying the sea level rise is accelerating and we must prepare the country for 3 meters of sea level rise by the end of the century. And 3 meters, that's a lot of water. Because it's not always stable, occasionally you'll have a storm, it gets a bit higher, it gets rather. And so their recommendation was, if we want to protect the country and sustain life in the Netherlands, we better start investing now. And then the crazy thing happened. Well, I happened to see that edition of the news. So this very serious gentleman was making these statements. And then the NGO, Environmental Protection NGO, was being interviewed. And I would have expected these people would have been furious at this report. And they said, wow, we're so glad that the Commission is now taking this serious. And we should really protect the country by the end of the century against this from happening. Since when is an NGO there to be in agreement with the government? We should fight climate change now. And all of you, I mean, you're here because you get this, yeah? I don't think you come and listen to me to be convinced, because I don't think I could convince you anyway. Well, you need to be convinced, okay. But all of you understand this stuff. But all of you, whenever you speak about sustainability, please do not speak anymore that you do this for your children or the children of your children. Because this shit will hit us in your lifetimes. It's happening on your watch. So please don't talk too much about what will happen at the end of the century. You must do things now. And it's not just climate, it's plastic in the oceans, it's jobs in the future, it's all these things.
Okay, yes, on the right here. Oh, okay, fine, sorry.
Thank you. Peter, you talked about the shift from sustainability being just about the environment to broader social issues. I'd just be interested in hearing you talk more about that.
Yeah, no, so President Trump, let me start there. It's always good to get people's attention. A couple of months ago, went to Ohio, put on a hard hat, posted a few miners behind him for the photo, and said, I'm living up to my speeches in the campaign, and I'm going to bring mining jobs back to Ohio. And he was withdrawing all kind of coal-fired power restriction policies that Obama administration had put in. And so you look at that and you think, wow, what happened here? You know, coal mining, why would you want to go back to that? So we actually ran the numbers. So there are 80,000 miners in the USA. And yes, these jobs are all at risk. And I'm sure here in Australia, that's given the big impact in your economy, it may even be many more jobs. But they're still all at risk over time. We need to find pathways for these people out of there. But the numbers in the USA is 80,000 miners, 2.3 million people employed in renewable energy. So the transition from a job point of view had no social impacts whatsoever at macro level. But that's not the point, because jobs don't move at macro level. They sit at kitchen tables, being worried about their children going to university. And when you're jobless or threatening to lose your job, you're going to worry. And then somebody comes on the television and says he has an answer. And you don't care whether that's the right answer or the wrong answer. You think, well, that's better than the clown who is in the office now. And you vote. So 80,000 miners. Now look at other jobs. As said many times, I used to be in the trucking business. There are 6.4 million truckers in North America and Europe today. The prediction is, and this is not me, this is the OECD, prediction is that 4.4 million of these, mostly gentlemen, will lose their jobs in 10 years from now. And why is that? Because of autonomous driving trucks. You can drive a truck from Portugal, Lisbon, to Warsaw, Poland, in 20 hours if you put no driver on it. You need 3 days if you have to comply with resting times and all that stuff. If you put trucks 30 centimeters apart, 10 after each other, you'll save 40% of diesel, 40% or more of greenhouse gas emissions. The amount of accidents will reduce by 80 or 90%. Why? Because these things will drive themselves, and sensors are a little more consistent than people. So 4.4 million jobs will be gone. These are truck drivers. What are they going to do? We need lots of nurses because people are getting older and need more care. We need many more teachers. Well, the truck drivers I know don't quite qualify for either of those positions. We need coders for whatever program and IT apps we need. That's going to be quite a tough transition as well. So net, macro, there's now plenty of studies saying the digitization is going to be good because we're going to create jobs. But that's not the answer. The transition from jobs we lose and the types of jobs we create needs to be managed. And I don't want to belabor the point too long, but the traditional answer from business, I would argue even of the more forward-thinking business people in this room, is yeah, but labor market, that's up to government. We business people, we employ, but we're here to make a bit of money. Yes, we'll take good care of our people, but we're not here to solve imbalances in labor markets. Well, you're wrong. The labor market is just like the atmosphere. So far in history, ups and downs, ebb and flow have always been balancing each other, and you can leave it to the public good to manage the unbalances. In this massive transition driven by IT, which will go global overnight, you know, Uber and Airbnb, these companies were formed in less than 5 years. Airbnb is now the biggest hotel chain measured in number of rooms or nights booked. It didn't even exist 10 years ago. So these transitions will go so rapid that the disbalances and the transition stress will be so high that you cannot make it a public good anymore for the governments or the social security networks to fix it. Business will need to fix it. So concepts like lifelong learning will come back. Very creative ideas like, I'm going to pay you $100,000 salary, I'm going to pay you another $50,000 for your education. I'll put it in a saving account. You can use it when you think you need to re-educate yourself. You can also go on holiday for the money, if that's what you prefer to do, but then you first pay 80% tax. Invest it in yourself, you pay no tax. That's things that business can do. So we need whole new thinking on the social paragraph. We need to wholly new think, is a 40-hour work week, or whatever the max is in your country, is that still what we need? Or are we going to parcel it up in different ways? And I don't know about you guys, but I've been in business quite a while. I would never wait for the government to design that for me. I would sit down in a group like yours and say, what would be answers that we can collectively dream up? And then you're the driver of the future, the pathfinder.
Okay. Yes, please.
Sorry, I just had a question. Maybe it's for both John and Peter. It goes back to that 3-metre sea level rise, but it also goes back to a report, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the report, but basically on the sort of the melting of the glaciers, and the only way to basically adjust for that would be to somehow bund the whole of Antarctica, which would be an enormous expense. So just have you ever done any calculations on the cost of, say, what it would cost to prevent a 3-metre sea level rise around the Netherlands? And I just don't know, the cost of trying to bund the Antarctic continent would be, it'd probably bankrupt the world, right? So there's this argument that says, economically, we're better off just going along and mitigating for the costs of climate change. Well, why don't you publish reports and say, well, if we did that, the cost is going to be so much. It's not going to be trillions, it's going to be quintillions.
Yeah, so at global level, and I think it has been separated into continents, not in individual countries as far as I know, but globally there's a thing called the New Climate Economy Report. It's a very interesting resource to look into. Came out about 2 years ago, has been updated this September. And it basically says the world will invest $90 trillion in the next 15 years in infrastructure. It's a massive amount of cities and other infrastructures being built. If we decide now to invest all those dollars in infrastructure on green, science-based targets, the maximum increase of cost would be 4%, which is just roundings. So we have an enormous opportunity in front of us by now making the right investment decisions. I have no idea what it would cost to do whatever you suggest we do to the Arctic. I couldn't even imagine the cost of it. I have no idea what it would even cost to build dikes and other solutions to keep 3 meters of water out of an insignificant country like the Netherlands. It would blow up the budget for many a decade, I'm sure. I have no idea what the cost is for the droughts that are here now in Australia, to the farming community, to the unpredictability of supply chains moving into the food system. There must be measurable cost today. But I think, the problem with sustainability people, myself included, and this speech is always on the edge of going right and going wrong, is we can easily lull ourselves into doom and gloom, like, oh, well, it's too late now, isn't it? That's not the right energy. The $90 trillion to be invested from tomorrow onwards, we can all make better choices. We can all build infrastructure. We're going to invest it anyway, because we're going to need the infrastructure. Let's make the right choices. And that's where business comes in. There's now plenty companies in the world who are locked into RE100 or EV100 or all kind of science-based commitments. You know, if the next car you build or buy, and nobody here should consider buying a diesel ever again. Nobody here should consider buying a combustion engine ever again. Electric vehicles are fine. And yeah, if you want to go long distance in Australia, rent a car the 2 times a year that you do it. Because you're all running around the block in Melbourne and Sydney for the majority of your kilometers. It's simple choices you make. Begin with 1 day without meat. Move it up to 2. And soon you'll begin to enjoy it. Take a policy. Who of you have plastic bottles of water in your offices? Put a policy in place, no more plastic bottles. Give anybody for $10 a metal or a glass bottle, put your logo on it saying, I'm really proud that you work here. If you want to drink in this office, you use this. It's simple stuff we can all do. And then slowly but certainly the mind shift will change, and then we see the opportunities. And that's the lens you should be looking for.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I've just got the sign that I've got to cut it off.
Oof.
I'll just make one comment, though. I think it emphasises the need for a lot more strategic thinking in a country like Australia. I mean, our political system is so short-term and focused, we live by hour or day by day at best. But the business community and some of the other levels of civil society can actually lead in terms of some of that strategic thinking and getting people to think about the day-to-day choices they make in the context of those longer-term strategic plans. So I think it's a great opportunity for people to start to see what they can do. That old Kennedy statement, don't ask what the country can do for you, but ask what you can do for the country. That sort of thinking is fundamentally important in this respect. Yeah. Now, I think we need to bring it to a close, unfortunately, and you want us to go off. Is that? Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Would you please now welcome Virginia Ford Zink, co-founder of the Zinc Charitable Trust and Director of Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia, here to give the vote of thanks, ladies and gentlemen, Virginia Ford Zink.
Thank you. Wow, well, Peter, thank you so very much for that. It was absolutely tremendous. On behalf of our newly named Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia, thank you for delivering such an insightful, fascinating and timely speech. It really is inspiring to hear how true leadership and vision can galvanise business. From large multinationals to small business, I think you've really painted the picture as to how we all need to take responsibility and help drive that growth in the sustainable world we want to live in. What is very interesting is that by better aligning with the Sustainable Development Goals, doing good for society and the environment can also be very beneficial to the bottom line and an overall more improved vision for the future. I think importantly, it's also being driven by consumers and, as you pointed out, a workforce who will want to come to work for your company. Australia has definitely been in that policy vacuum that you mentioned. We've had a decade of very, very little action on climate change and any type of vision for how to transition to a low-carbon economy. As the Wentworth by-election demonstrates, and John mentioned, lack of policy on climate played a large role in the massive swing against the government. John, our new chair-elect, and I re-quote what he said, is that a government that does not have an effective climate action plan forfeits the right to govern. And I couldn't agree more. Peter, your oration just now was absolutely a clarion call for business and for all of us to act. Now more than ever, business in Australia in particular has a vital role to play in building a vision towards a more sustainable economy. Your experience and what you are achieving at the WBCSD demonstrates this very well. My dear friend Fiona, in that photograph there, whom this oration honours, would be so thrilled to know that SBA would continue to develop after her untimely passing in October 2012. She would be genuinely delighted to know that we would become part of a strong, internationally led, purpose-driven organisation, while at the same time focusing on the local business community and contributing to driving the sustainable development agenda in Australia. That will certainly be our focus with our newly named organisation in conjunction with the WBCSD. For those of you that knew Fiona, she was a passionate advocate for businesses to understand and take action on climate change and sustainable issues. For those of you who have been at conferences with her, you would remember how fiercely she could argue her case, and sometimes the fear and trembling that not just business leaders but politicians could actually feel when towards the end of the conference she would rise to her feet and ask that absolutely killer question that they were all dreading. She was quite famous for it. Fiona was not just a warrior at the corporate level, but also at the personal level, never missing a chance to go armed with her plastic bag and tongs, and not her plastic bag, her bucket and tongs to pick up plastic and waste at her beloved Balmoral beach. And woe betide anyone that she saw ignoring the no smoking sign on the beach. I was actually with her once, this is a true story. It was probably about 8 weeks before she died. There was a group of really tough-looking big guys standing there, fags, puffing on the beach. And I thought, oh my God. Fiona marched up to them and said, "Can't you read? Put that smoke out or I'm going to stuff it up your nostril." And trust me, they took her advice and put the cigarette out. So she really was totally fearless. And I think the way that you described leadership, Peter, with linking it into the way, word of pathfinder, was so totally appropriate for Fiona and all that she did. We are delighted that you have placed your trust and confidence in our organisation to be your valued partner in Australia. We really do thank you for that. And we commit to being a worthy partner with you in helping to change the debate and to raise the level of sustainability and getting action in this vitally important area. I couldn't think of a better person to deliver this very, very special fifth oration for Fiona Wain, and we thank you most sincerely. Okay, before I go, I'd just like to welcome Gras van Egmond to the stage, who is the CEO of the Banksia Foundation. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. It astounds me the influence of Andrew Peterson. Peter, I think you would notice the orange carpet that Andrew had put in honour of you today. So, Andrew, you've done it again. Thank you very much. This year, the Banksia Foundation, Australia's not-for-profit organisation dedicated to working with industry and community to create an array of platforms to focus attention on the recognition of excellence in sustainability, marks an important landmark. We celebrate the 30th anniversary, and in that 30 years, we have recognised and rewarded over 500 leaders across business, government, community, academia and the media. And we are the longest running sustainability awards in the world, so that's something that we do in Australia. So what Peter may not know is that in 1997, WBCSD was one of the rare recipients of the Banksia International Award for its visionary recognition of the role of business in transitioning our world to a more sustainable future. And in 2015, then WBCSD Chairman and Unilever CEO Paul Polman also received this prestigious award for his contribution to the realisation of the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. As we celebrate our 30th year, we would like you to accept this special recognition of the work that WBCSD continues to lead in by accelerating the transition to a sustainable world by making more sustainable businesses more successful. This leadership is needed now more than ever, and especially in Australia, to ensure that we all come to the realisation that we do need to care, and what you mentioned, not just now, but into the future, and make that difference. Thank you, Peter, for your inspirational leadership. Peter, if you could come up to accept this. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm a whole lot better at shouting about the environment than I am at saying thank you for this, but it's beautiful. And I can only accept it really because it says for the World Business Council. That's what this is. Because the World Business Council, just like the Business Council here in Australia, brings together leading companies. And that's where the scale will live in everything we do. It's not about one voice, a story. It's all pieces of it. But when we pull all business together in the same direction, when we learn to collaborate, like Andrew and the board and everybody here is doing, then we will get there. Let me tell you one last story, if I may, Andrew. A good friend of ours died 2.5 years ago. He was the first Dutch, it ain't much, but it is Dutch, astronaut ever to be shot into space. And he told me a story not too long before he died. And he said, you know, when you're in a space machine shot up out of the atmosphere into space, all the astronauts at one point make a mistake. And that is, they look out of the window. And then what do they see? They see a little blue ball in a sea of absolute black nothing. And all of them know that in that sea of absolutely black nothing, no man or woman can survive. Make a mistake with your spacesuit, you're dead. They know. The second thing they see is that when you look down on Earth and you zoom in a little bit more, you just see green and blue, land and water. Everything else that we argue about is made up. There are no borders. We don't care who runs one part of town and the other part of town. It's just our imagination. And the third thing you see when you look out of the window, at the right moment when the sun is well positioned, you see a paper-thin layer around the blue ball. We call it the atmosphere. It's literally paper-thin, and that's what keeps us alive on this planet. Let's be careful with it. Thank you.